Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
Where is purgatory in the Bible?
What's stopping you?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. If you've got a question about the Catholic faith, this is a great place to get that question answered. Also, we'd like to know what is stopping you from becoming a Catholic. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening to us outside of North America, please dial the U.S. country code. In many cases, that's going to be the number 1, and then 205-271-2985. If you're watching us on TV today, you can participate as well. Our email address, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Charles Beery is our producer. Matt Gabinski is our phone screener. Jeff Burson handles social media for us. If you want to ask a question via YouTube or Facebook, we're streaming there right now. Just put your question in the comments box. Jeff will see it. He'll shoot it to us here in the studio. Hopefully we can get that question of yours answered on today's program. I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Doing great. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing decent, thank you.
Interesting objection to the Catholic faith here from John D. He says, Dr. Anders, in Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30, Jesus states that he will give rest to those with heavy burdens and that his yoke is easy. Well, when I listen to apologetic Catholic radio programs like yours, a great percentage of what I hear is various explanations of all the burdens that the Catholic Church heaps on top of the simple gospel. So where is the rest to be found in a system that is so laden with extra biblical rules and mandates?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So, I am a Catholic. I think that's no secret on this show.
True.
I've been a Catholic for 19 years now, and I will tell you that I do not experience the expectations, the precepts of the Church, if you will. Those are the things that are specifically mandated for Catholic life that you might say are sort of above and beyond the moral prescriptions of the Bible and the natural law. I do not find them at all burdensome, because they basically amount to things like this. Go to church on Sundays. Go to church on Sundays.
Yep.
A couple times a year, you're going to engage in a very light fast. Not an onerous fast. Just a very light fast. Well, fasting is something that is part of the natural law. It's something that is naturally good for our bodies, and it's part of the Christian and Jewish tradition going back thousands of years and other traditions as well. And if you compare the prescriptions on fasting in the Catholic Church to many other religious traditions, including, I should add, a lot of Protestants that I know that go on for these 30-day-long fasts and some pretty hardcore stuff. I think, when I first encountered the fasts of the Catholic Church, I was like, are you sure you have the right name? Like, should we call this a fast, or should we just call this a light snack? It's like, it's not burdensome.
Yeah.
And then there are a couple of times, well, more than a couple, just 3 or 4 or 5 times during the year when we go to Mass on a day other than Sunday. And then also we are obligated to support the temporal needs of the Church. Now, I know many Protestant congregations impose a kind of strict 10% tithe on income, and I've even heard of a 10% tithe on revenue imposed on their members. That's not what the Catholic Church asks. The Catholic Church asks that you contribute to the temporal welfare of the Church.
Yeah.
So I don't find these particularly burdensome at all. And in fact, I find them pretty light, pretty easy. And compared to some of the things that constrained me when I grew up within a fundamentalist form of Christianity. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I remember being in grammar school and having a grammar school teacher explain to me that certain rhythms that were found in popular music were intrinsically demonic and would summon the devil. And I, being the kind of sort of child that I was, I remember tapping out a rhythm on my desk and then asking if I was sinning. That didn't go down very well in my fifth grade classroom.
Yeah.
It was intrinsically immoral to engage in this kind of music or that kind of dress or this kind of dance. And then the thought police, the sense of having every thought of my mind sort of scrutinized by the orthodoxy police of fundamentalism that prevented me from, say, engaging with natural science or philosophy or with other religious traditions in a sort of amicable, open-minded way for dialogue. These kinds of sort of positive engagement with the world and my neighbor and the life of reason, all of that was shut down, closed off to me within the framework of fundamentalism. It wasn't one specific command on one day. It was a pervasive threat to my existence and to my sanity that I lived with on a daily basis, enforced with massive amounts of corporal punishment. So, no, we didn't have to fast during Lent. Oh my gosh, what I would have given to unburden myself from the weight of fundamentalism for the privilege of fasting during Lent. But I think the frame of reference of the New Testament is neither Catholic canon law nor fundamentalist Protestantism. It really is the appeal of the gospel versus what Jesus often criticized in the ritualistic Judaism of his own day, from which the gospel, in fact, does liberate the Gentile.
All right, then. John, thanks so much for your email. Here's one now from Steve. You mentioned that we can know when Old Testament passages are not to be taken as historical or metaphysical events when this sense of them contradicts the nature of God. Is this official church teaching, and where can I find an authoritative reference to it?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So what is official church teaching is that the Scripture has multiple senses. And we talk about the spiritual sense and the literal sense. And the spiritual sense is subdivided into allegorical, anagogical, and moral. That's dogmatic teaching. That is the authoritative teaching of the church. How do you differentiate? How do you know when you're dealing with the literal, and how do you know when that can be elaborated into these various forms of the spiritual? Well, that's a little bit more nuanced, and it does actually require a degree of sophistication. And the more you understand critically and scientifically about the text, the better your capacity to do that. And so drawing those lines is kind of a work of art and nuance. But in terms of specific theological instruction about how to do that, when I make those comments, I'm usually referencing the allegorical exegesis of St. Gregory of Nyssa, in particular his commentary on the life of Moses and his commentary on the Song of Songs, is when he specifically articulates this idea about contradicting the nature of God. Now, St. Augustine of Hippo, in the book on Christian doctrine, does something similar, saying that we interpret every passage according to the rule of love.
Beautiful. Hey, Steve, thanks so much for your email. In a moment, we'll talk with Marianne in Queens, New York. Lots more straight ahead on this edition of Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. Call now.
Hi, I'm Father Mitch Paquin. I'm going to be at the EWTN Family Celebration in Phoenix, Arizona. Hope to see you there.
Make your plans now to attend the EWTN Family Celebration October 1st at the Phoenix Convention Center in Phoenix, Arizona. Find out how you can be a part at EWTN.com/family celebration.
This is a Messy Family Minute with Mike and Alicia Hernan. Every couple makes decisions differently. Sometimes the person with the stronger personality makes the decision, or the person who cares the most makes the decision, or the person who feels they have the right to make the decision makes the decision. There is a problem with this.
In all of these situations, one spouse can sit on the sidelines, wash their hands of the results, or feel free to second guess and criticize the other. These are not examples of life-giving decision-making.
Joint decision means just that, deciding jointly after discussion, prayer, or simple agreement. But the most important part is that you agree as a couple to share the responsibility for that decision, because mutual decision means mutual responsibility. When you both agree to bear the responsibility for the decision, both of you assume the risk.
That is the type of unity that Christ challenges married couples to strive for. To listen to our podcast on parenting as a team, visit us at messyfamilyminute.org.
It's Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-EWTN. 288-3986. Here's an email now from Jamie as we're getting some of these calls screened. Jamie says, I hope you are both well. I keep hearing references to redemptive suffering. Even in Protestant churches, their, quote, give it to God mentality. I just don't understand, though, if I am hurting or anxious or dealing with depression, how do I, quote, use it for the good? If there is a prayer or something that makes regular suffering redemptive. If you could please help me understand this, that would be fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate all you guys do. That's from Jamie.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Jamie. I really appreciate it. And I want to say something specific about depression, because if you are struggling with depression, it is not necessary to simply passively acquiesce to the depression. And depression is something for which treatment is available and desirable. And most often depression is diagnosed, as you know, I'm sure, through particular patterns of pessimistic, self-condemning thoughts. And so there's a sort of added quality with depression, as opposed to, say, like a bum knee, right, that doesn't involve actually your cognition.
Right.
And when it comes to dealing with the suffering of our interior lives, the suffering of our minds, there are things that we can do about it rather than just sort of giving into it. In the ancient church, they used to emphasize acquiring a state of mind called apatheia, which is a kind of conquering of the passions, sort of not being tossed in on the waves of one's own sort of chaotic emotions, if you will. And so that's a desirable place to be. But when it comes to these other kinds of pains that maybe you can't do anything about them, your knee's busted, you have some tragedy in your life, the idea of redemptive suffering is that we can have apatheia. We can have a kind of dispassion. We can have a kind of quiet of the soul, a kind of peace in our interior life in the face of these things when we recognize that everything happens within the providence of God.
Sure.
And this is a trial in my life, and it is an objective form of suffering. It's extremely unpleasant. I don't like it. I wouldn't choose it. But given that it's come to me and there's nothing I can do about it, I can sort of kick against the goads and rage against God and against reality. Or I can say with the Blessed Virgin Mary, be it done to me according to thy word. Or with our Lord, who said, not my will, but thine be done.
Yeah.
And then when we have that attitude, we're being like Christ. We're being like Mary. And we're surrendering to divine providence. And that's meritorious. The way of salvation is to follow the way of Christ, ultimately to the cross. But even in these small crucifixions that we have to go through every day, the petty indignities and inconveniences, and sometimes great indignities and inconveniences that we have to put up with, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that go to make up the course of human life. And we can either, like I said, we rail against those in a sort of anger or anxiety or panic or despair, or we can trust. And when we do the latter, it is meritorious and has redemptive value.
I was just thinking about all the many times, little bitty things that you're angry about. If you just give it up, then a week later you're thinking, now what was I so angry about last week?
Exactly.
Wow. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. Here is Mary Ann to kick things off, a first-time caller from Queens, New York, listening on EWTN television. Hey, Mary Ann, what's on your mind today?
Hi, thank you for having me. My question to you is, I am an older adult. I just turned 60 years old. I am divorced. And a couple of years ago, I met a man who was also in his 60s and divorced. And we are in an exclusive relationship with one another. And we don't want to get married again for a lot of legal reasons, right? Or just, a lot of reasons, personal reasons. However, I understand that this is a sin in the eyes of the church, and we do want to get closer back to our Catholic roots. And I wanted to know if this would be a problem, since we don't want to legally be married to one another.
I really appreciate the question. Thank you so much. So the teaching of the church is that sexual relationships of any kind are to be constrained within holy matrimony. That outside of matrimony, it's either fornication or adultery, depending on the context, and that's not acceptable. And there are a number of reasons for this. Ultimately, sexual union is ordered towards the kind of relationship that would naturally be fulfilled in building a family. Now, I know for many people beyond a certain age, they say, well, look, I'm not going to have kids. I'm too old for that. So why does that matter for me? Because the nature of the sexual union as such is still ordered to that kind of thing. I want the kind of union that's characterized by the sort of permanence and commitment and self-sacrifice that would naturally be sort of family building. And even if one is not capable of having children, one can still witness that kind of, manifest that kind of community in the world. Because, see, marriage is ultimately not just about myself. It's about entering into a public state of life for the good of the church, for the good of my neighbor, for the good of society, for the good of the world, either through physically replenishing the world through offspring, or letting the fecundity and the fruitfulness of our love be manifest around to everybody in a sort of family-like way, right? And so that's what physical sexuality is for. It's ordered to that end, that kind of union between people. And when we take it out of that end, what we do is we risk really sort of commoditizing one another, instrumentalizing the body, the sexual act, and there's all the difference in the world between saying to a man or a woman, you know, I'd like to spend my life with you. I want to dedicate myself to you, make a pledge of fidelity to you forever till death do us part, through thick and thin, better for worse, rich and poor, sick and health. I want to give myself to you in that way. And someone who says, well, I don't want that kind of commitment. I just want sexual intimacy with you, but I'm not willing to really make the sacrifices and offer myself to you in this kind of utterly self-giving way. The character of the relationship is radically different, and it's conditioned by that promise. And so this is a very sacred thing, human sexuality, and it's supposed to be set in that kind of loving, self-sacrificial context. And if one's not willing to make a commitment to another person of that kind of gravity, then it totally changes the meaning of the act.
Yeah. Marianne, lots to think about, lots to pray about. Thanks so much for your call. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion here on EWTN. Let's go to this question from Frederick, watching us on YouTube today. Frederick says, what was the first Bible that the Catholics made in the 300s? What was it called by name? And did it have the apocryphal books that the Protestants reject?
Yes, thanks. So the Catholics did not make the first Bible in the 300s. All right, that's a little bit of a mischaracterization. The Church received the Scriptures from the apostles and prophets and from the in the historical writings of the Old Covenant. And what did they call them? Well, they called them Scriptures, Scriptura, or writings, graphe in Greek. And they simply refer, or Biblia, which was the books, which just referred to the collection of canonical texts that were handed down by sacred tradition. And so the Church venerated these, and that would include, you call them Apocrypha, we call them the deuterocanonical texts, would have included the deuterocanonical texts of the Old Testament. And that would have been from the apostles. Now, the business about the 4th century and the 300s that you refer to, this is when the Church authoritatively defined the contents of the canon. So they said, okay, it's these books and not these others. But the reason the Church issued an authoritative declaration to define the contents of the canon, the criteria that they used were, these were the books that we've always been using, you see. So let me contrast that. So there's an apocryphal gospel, a New Testament book floating around the world today called the Gospel of Thomas. Why didn't the Gospel of Thomas make it into the New Testament? Well, because it was only used in Syria. It was pretty much limited to the Syrian church. And therefore it wasn't Catholic. The word Catholic means universal. So if a book had been venerated from the beginning, handed on from the apostles, by all the churches everywhere, the churches universally, that's what Catholicity means, then the 4th century doctors and fathers of the church said, yes, this is one that's gone out everywhere where the gospel has gone out, so we know it's of apostolic origin. This Gospel of Thomas business, only in Syria, can't be Catholic.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if it wasn't there from the beginning as part of the deposit of faith, then it wasn't of the Catholic faith. So that's all they did in the 4th century was say, okay, these books that we've always had, those are the ones that are canonical. Those are the ones that are inspired. These interlopers that have popped up here, there, and yonder in little random places, we're not accepting those.
Very good. And Frederick, great question. Thanks for checking in today on YouTube. It is called A Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. A couple lines open for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. All right, here is Joe in Pennsylvania listening today on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today, sir?
My question is, all aborted babies go to heaven, so in a way it's not ultimately so terrible. They have no chance to go to hell. what I want to say is, remember what Jesus said about Judas, better had he never been born.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So I take it your objection is that why should the church get so exercised about abortion, given that these children would seem to go straight to heaven? Do I understand you correctly?
Well, I'm basing it mostly on what Jesus said about Judas. Better had he never been born.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, Jesus is not the only place that kind of sentiment is articulated. The book of Ecclesiastes says something similar about the human condition. Happy is the man who, was stillborn from his mother's womb because he spared the woes and sorrows of life, right? So the question is, does that attitude does it justify murder? So many people, the Catholics all regard, say, Mother Teresa of Calcutta as a saint. So we believe that she's in heaven. And even many non-Catholics, I think, would look and say, look, this is someone who lived an exemplary life of self-sacrifice. Mm-hmm. He's a moral exemplar. If anybody made it to heaven, Mother Teresa did. Well, would that justify assassinating her? Of course not, right? Because the act itself is objectively gravely evil. An act is gravely evil or not, depending on the quality of the act, not the consequences of the act. You say, to argue otherwise, you might say, well, you could justify anything if the consequences were good. Any kind of horror show could be justified if it had good consequences. And a bad act can have good consequences, to be sure,
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't make the act itself intrinsically good. You can't shoot Mother Teresa just because she's going to go to heaven. You can't club somebody in the head just because you believe they're going to go to heaven. That's true of adults. It's true of babies in the womb as well.
All right. Joe, thanks so much for your call. Here is a question now from Rebecca. I am a cradle Catholic, but I have Protestant friends who are born-again Christians. They were baptized. Why does the Catholic Church rebaptize people that were already baptized? Does the Catholic Church recognize the baptism of other denominations? And if not, please explain the reason why.
Thank you. The Catholic Church does not rebaptize people who are validly baptized. In fact, the Catholic Church has made a big deal out of not rebaptizing people who are already baptized. In fact, it is a dogma of the faith.
Whoa.
It is a dogma of the faith that it is a grave sin to rebaptize people who have already been validly baptized. In fact, this came to a head in the 4th century in North Africa in something called the Donatist controversy. There was a breakaway group that left the Catholic Church, and they maintained the policy of rebaptizing people that had been validly baptized. And St. Augustine of Hippo, doctor of the Catholic faith, contended with them and said, absolutely not, don't do that. So it is false that the Catholic Church ever rebaptizes anybody. Now, occasionally, someone will present themselves for admission to the Catholic Church, and it will turn out that they had some sort of ceremony, but it wasn't baptism.
Ah.
And so in this case, it's not a matter of rebaptizing. It's a matter of baptizing absolutely for the first time, because that thing that they did before was not baptism. I'll give you an example that I'm making up off the top of my head.
Okay.
Jesus said you are to baptize in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So if somebody showed up, from a studio lot in Hollywood and said, I was baptized in the name of Huey, Dewey, and Louie, that would not be baptism. Not what Jesus meant, not what Jesus said. And so someone may present some other rite. They may use the name baptism to describe it, but if it doesn't have the form instituted by Jesus, which is water flowing over the scalp, and baptizing in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit with the intent of making one a Christian and a member of Christ's body, the church. If it doesn't have that form, then whatever they may call it, that's not actual baptism. But can Protestants and others of other denominations validly baptize? Yes, they can. So I, for example, was baptized Presbyterian. When I became a Catholic, the church did not rebaptize me.
Same for me when I was baptized in the Southern Baptist faith.
There you go.
Back in the day. All right. Thank you, Rebecca. Here's a quick question from Tom. Is the Blessed Virgin omnipresent in the same way that God is? While I was praying, I wondered if I could be sure that the Virgin Mary could hear my prayers.
No. The Blessed Virgin Mary is not omnipresent. That is an attribute of divinity, and she is not God. Can she hear your prayers? That is an interesting question. Actually, we don't have to know the answer to that question for our prayers to the Blessed Virgin Mary to still be relevant and efficacious. Let me explain why. Let us say, for the sake of argument, that Mary does not have conscious knowledge of every petition sent her way. Does God have conscious knowledge of every petition sent Mary's way?
Sure.
Of course he does, because he is omnipresent and omniscient. And so provided Mary has the intent to intercede for all of those who seek her intercession, it is not actually necessary for her to have conscious, immediate knowledge of those prayers in order for her intercession to be effective. On the other hand, what if God, in his omniscience and omnipotence, decided in some miraculous way known only to him to bring the content of those prayers to the glorified mind of the Blessed Virgin Mary, such that she did have conscious knowledge of all of our petitions? We don't know what's possible in heaven. Could God do that too? Of course he could.
He's God.
So whether or not she has conscious knowledge of every petition, she can still efficaciously intercede for us.
All right. And Tom, thanks so much for your email. If you would like to send us an email for a future show, here is the address, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. In a moment, we're going to be talking with Donna in Illinois. Several lines are open for you right now. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, or if you'd like to explain to us what is stopping you from becoming a Catholic. In any event, the phone number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion here on EWTN. Do stay with us.
"60 Seconds" with Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen.
If anyone is coming from God with a revelation for our reason and the strength for our will, reason is going to impose certain tests, and these tests are three. And they're tests that can be verified by reason and by history. First, whoever comes should be pre-announced. 2, he should work miracles in attestation of the fact that he is a messenger. 3rd, nothing that he ever teaches or reveals to us should be contrary to human reason, though it may be above it. Those are 3 tests. That's the standard. That's a measuring rod. First, we say anyone who comes should be pre-announced. After all, brides pre-announce their wedding. Automobile manufacturers tell us when a new model would appear. And if God is going to send someone to this earth, certainly the least that God can do is to let us know, I'm sending someone.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
Called to Communion is on YouTube. Search YouTube to find the EWTN YouTube channel, so you'll never miss an episode of our show or any of your favorite EWTN radio shows.
If you have a few minutes a day, you can become an EWTN media missionary in your parish, in your community, or through prayer. Be a part of Mother Angelica's mission. Place your gifts and strengths in service to Christ and His church by volunteering your time and sharing the eternal word with the world. Visit EWTNmissionaries.com today. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
How well do you give control of your life to God?
That's our topic tomorrow on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
On most of these EWTN stations.
Now back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
Hey, what's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? Let's talk about that here on EWTN's Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. If you call right now, we can hopefully get you on today's program. 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're watching us on TV today, the email address is ctc@ewtn.com. All right, let's go to Donna in Illinois, listening on YouTube today. Hello, Donna. What's on your mind?
Hi. I have a high school friend who is trying to proselytize me out of the church and is claiming that the church is led by Satan. And he's giving me all kinds of stuff that I've heard a million times before from different people. I don't hear it a lot, I guess, but it's just really like, okay, he just sounds like he's got something against the church. But I've heard people using biblical passages before against it that I've heard arguments about. But this guy is just, using stuff that I don't have a problem defending it. I'm having a problem, like, he's not hearing me, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm just never going to get across it. But we're just kind of like going past each other, and I don't know if there's anything I could even say. But for one, I'm like, there's people out there who probably need to hear this argument, and maybe I just haven't heard you respond to this one before. And the other thing is, I'm just getting frustrated, so...
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate your call on the show. So what came to my mind when you were speaking and when I was reading your question, the call screener put up on my computer, was this is not the first time in history that enemies of the gospel have accused the agents of the gospel of operating by the power of the devil. In fact, I think the first accusation of that sort we read about in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12. One possessed with a demon was brought to Jesus, blind and mute, and Christ healed him. So the blind and mute man both spoke and saw, and the people were amazed and said, "Is he not the son of David?" But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, "This man does not cast out demons, except by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons." Right?
Yeah.
So they said the same thing about Jesus Christ himself, that he did what he did because he was guided or led by Satan. Right? So if they said that about the head, they're going to continue to say it about the body. And the church has been accused of demonism and sorcery and witchcraft and Satanism for 2,000 years. And the most manifest response that the church has to this accusation is to produce saints, to produce people of a character exactly opposite to that of Satan, because as Jesus said, Satan does not cast out Satan, and Satan is not in the business of making saints.
Yeah.
And so you look to the holiness of the saints, the Mother Teresas of the world, and the St. Francises of the world, and the St. Dominics of the world, and the St. Catherines of the world, and whoever your favorites are, and you say, does this look to you like the work of Satan? But in terms of dealing with the anxiety that your friend creates for you, here's a question. Why should you be anxious, right? You should only be anxious if you feel like you have there's some sort of onus or obligation to persuade him. And I don't think you have any such obligation. When I look to the ministry of Jesus, I don't think I ever saw, you ever see Jesus engaged in trying to persuade people. When people came at Christ with contrary attitudes and when they were divisive or attacked him, he was more or less content to let them go their way and to eat the bitter fruits of their own hatred. And when they didn't follow him, he was like, all right then. And he told his apostles, when they don't listen to you in one town, you just wipe the dust off of your feet and keep going, right? You're not obligated to this person to change their mind at all. And I think, I think back on a very old, wise Dominican priest I used to know, he's dead now, who used to respond to this kind of thing with laughter. He just thought it was absurd. He got a big kick out of it and just sort of laughed it off and was like, how absurd is that? And on he went with his life. He had no anxiety because you're secure in what you believe.
Sure.
And so it's really not on you. This guy has an agenda, and I understand something of this agenda because I used to share it. I used to have this attitude that I needed to go out and convert Catholics and attack the church and so forth before I became Catholic myself. And in my own life, that profound need to be right, to be victorious in argument, to go out and have a spiritual conquest and, convert somebody from the evil Catholic Church. What motivated me there was not love. It was insecurity and pride, right? I wasn't secure in myself or in my own faith or in my own life and felt bad about myself. And this is how I was going to be somebody. I was going to have a feather in my cap by converting Catholics. The farthest thing in the world from a Christ-like attitude, which is concerned with the genuine good of another human being.
There you go, Donna. Thank you so much for your call. Let's go to Jack now in Pensacola, listening on the great Guadalupe Radio. Jack, what's on your mind today, sir?
Yes, hello. Thanks for taking my call. And I apologize if I'm really hoarse. I'm a world religions professor. I just gave a lecture on Hinduism and ontologicalism. So my apologies if I come across the wrong way. I have a question for you, Dave. Is there, and I'm referring to some degree to Matthew 18, I think 21, 22, or is it 31, 32, where Peter's talking to Jesus and says, how many times should I forgive someone who offends me? Is it 7 times? And then Jesus says, no, it's 70 times 7. Is there a sense in which, however, that within Christianity there comes a point at which you really shouldn't forgive someone anymore who continues to offend you, or who, let's say you have a very difficult relationship with this person, every time it ends up in an argument, should at some point you just say, look, That's it. I'll have nothing to do, even though they profess to be a Christian. There's a sense in which I'm no longer required to keep forgiving this person for offending me. I know when Jesus is talking in the aorist sense, tense of the Greek, which the idea is 70 times 7 does not mean actually 490 times, and then at 491 you're absolved of having to. He means always, right? It means always forgive people. However, is there also just in some sort of spiritual sense? Is this taught?
I understand the question. I got you. I think I can help you. So the teaching of Christ and of the Catholic Church is that if we do not forgive others, God will not forgive us. And that is an absolute condition. And so, of course, the 70 times 7 is just a figurative way of, he was kind of coming back to the Apostles' question and put him in his place sort of thing, not to be taken as a literal, 490. The absolute teaching is that if we don't forgive others, God will not forgive us. Now, to the situation that you raise, what about someone who is just intolerable? And they are a thorn in your side and a fly in your ointment, and they have taken advantage and exploited and abused and manipulated one time after another so that you've lost all trust. Do I have to treat them like I've never met them before? Do I have to relate to that person with a blank slate and give them my total trust every time I issue the words forgiveness? Of course not. Jesus also said, be as wise as serpents, but as innocent as doves. And there is a virtue that St. Thomas writes about a good bit called prudence, and I know you know about the virtue of prudence. Prudence is the virtue of sound decision-making in the concrete, in the immediate, in the moment, in the now, looking at the context of the situation, trying to seek the real, genuine, integral good of the person. Now, what do we mean by forgiveness? Forgiveness doesn't mean that I give you a blank check. Forgiveness means that I am not going to allow the past to constrain my charity. I'm not going to refuse to offer you charity. But what is charity? Charity is wanting the genuine, authentic, integral good of that person. Now, if you have someone like this, you have someone that is manipulative and exploitive and unrepentant and a real problem in your life and other people's lives, charity would be to want that person to reform, wanting that person to change, wanting that person to stop being that way. And prudence might discern, just saying I'm sorry and inviting them back to the party every Friday night hasn't worked. It hasn't advanced that person's moral reformation.
Yeah.
So maybe I need another approach. Maybe now charity means that I'm going to keep my emotional distance, that I'm not going to allow myself or my family to be exploited or subjected to this kind of injustice. Because I want what's just for this person. And the way they're treating their own soul right now is an injustice against themselves and everybody else around them.
Yeah.
Now, if in time that person actually genuinely reformed and changed their character such that real Christian virtuous friendship were possible, well, hallelujah! But I'm not holding my breath.
Okay. And Jack, thanks so much for your call. Quick reminder here that EWTN on radio and television broadcasts the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass every morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, not just Monday through Friday, every day from Our Lady of the Angels Chapel, right here on EWTN radio and television. So be sure to join us. Let's go to Annie now on Long Island, listening on EWTN television. Annie, what's on your mind today?
Oh, am I on television or am I on the radio?
You're on radio and television right now. What's on your mind, Annie?
Okay, yeah. I'm 90 years old, and I love the Lord for many years, and I have friends that are in a denomination in the Protestant faith, and they found out that I became Catholic, and they don't want to know me anymore, and I just can't understand that. And I told them, and they told me it's a devil religion, and you should not be Catholic. And I said, you don't understand what Catholics teach. If you said a prayer, because they claim to be believers too, if you said a prayer and really wanted to know the truth, God would show you how beautiful the Catholic religion is. It's beautiful. Just going into the sanctuary and the Eucharist and the songs and the homilies, you would be convinced that it is not from the devil, nowhere near that. So I just wondered if you had other tips to tell me. What else can I do? I mean, I even made her favorite dessert and brought, my son brought it over and gave it to them, and I haven't heard from them. They're so against Catholic. I don't understand why.
Well, I really appreciate the question, Annie, and thank you so much for sharing your story. What a joy to hear about your coming into the church at age 90.
At the age of 90.
How wonderful is that? That's
wow.
Beautiful. So, it's unlikely that you're going to change your friend's mind because she's set in her ways and really dug in her heels, and she's highly invested in this rejection of the Catholic Church. And for her to change her mind would be to give up so much, and she would have to surrender so much of her own ego and her own certainty, and that's such an uncomfortable place to be for people. It's not likely to change her. And when I became Catholic, I lost friends. People stopped talking to me because I became Catholic. So that's not uncommon. And what I would tell you in the meanwhile is that, let's say that happens. Let's say your friend doesn't want to talk to you because you've become Catholic. Well, didn't that happen to the apostles? Didn't that happen to Jesus? Hasn't that often happened to the saints, that they've been rejected because of their love for Christ and his church?
Mm-hmm.
So if this is your lot, if this happens to you, well, welcome to the company of the saints and martyrs who have had to suffer for their faith in Jesus. So that puts you in really, really good company. And you're continuing to love this person, even though she treats you badly, that is the Catholic way, to love our enemies and to pray for those who persecute us. But in terms of, what is the evidence for the truth of the divine origins of the Catholic faith? Well, we'll start with the testimony of Jesus himself, who said to St. Peter, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And I give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, such that whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth is loosed in heaven." And to all the apostles he says, "Whoever hears you hears me, and whoever rejects you rejects me. Go therefore into all nations, making disciples, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and I will be with you until the end of the age." Christ founded the church on the rock of St. Peter, gave the apostles a commission to teach the deposit of faith and celebrate the sacraments. The gates of hell would never prevail, and Christ would accompany the church to the end of time. So it is from the teaching of our Lord that we discern the truth about the divine mission and origin of the Catholic faith. That will remain in perpetuity until he comes again. You can't have a stronger foundation than that.
Annie, great call. Thank you so much. Anybody that walks away from a friendship with Annie, it's their loss.
Their loss.
Absolutely.
Didn't she make the favorite cake? Didn't she say that?
Yes.
Made the favorite dessert?
Made the cake?
Made the cake and everything.
Oh, come on. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Colin now, a first-time caller in Owensboro, Kentucky, listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Hey, Colin, what's on your mind today?
Well, hey, how are you? I'm traveling for work today and was listening because I'm curious. I got a question, two questions. The first question is, I grew up Southern Baptist and then most recently was in a Presbyterian church, enjoy the liturgy, that sort of a thing, but have friends that are Catholic and have over the year or 2 years have warmed up to the idea of the Catholic faith, mostly specifically because one of a podcast that I listen to, Michael Knowles, he's a great ambassador for the Catholic faith. And just would be curious to know something in terms of a resource or something that I could read that would help me to explore that more. And then my second question is how does a Catholic, the Pope is, I understand that the Pope is the head of the church, so just curious, how does the Catholic square away if a Pope, like the current Pope, just appears to be more liberal than previous popes? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I really appreciate the question a lot. So, popes, like bishops, like priests, like politicians, like professional golfers, like dog catchers, like veterinarians, like housewives, like grammar school students, are human beings, and they have opinions that can be informed by one or another political or social ideology. It's hard to imagine functioning in the world today without some of the tendrils of ideological thinking infecting your approach to social issues. And popes are human beings like that, anybody else, right? And what the church, including the current pope, has always said about ideology is that ideology is something altogether different from Christian doctrine, right? And that the kingdom of God is not of this world, and that the way we are to function as the church and civil society is through preaching the gospel and living the life of grace. And insofar as we try to affect public policy, or ecclesiastical policy for that matter, we try to use our good, prudent reasoning to advance certain moral principles. But we're not supposed to impose an ideological blueprint, whether that blueprint be from the right or from the left, right? Because that's really trying to make the kingdom of God something that it's not. As if we could somehow force righteousness or holiness or utopia through, the works of our hands, as opposed to relying on the realm of grace, right? So that's just not how we function. That's easier said than done. So if you look through the history of the papacy for 2,000 years, what you find is that popes have always brought their political and ideological thinking to bear on policy issues within the church and civil society, and sometimes with disastrous results. I mean, some pope says he's going to declare war on the King of France, or he's going to take up arms against Florence, or he's going to enter into an alliance with the Holy Roman Emperor, or he's going to borrow money from some Italian city-state to build a palace. I mean, you name it. I mean, they've been doing this kind of thing, and to some extent they're forced into it when they enter into dialogue with secular states and so forth. They sort of have to deal with policy issues, and they're going to make good and bad judgments, right? Is the individual Catholic bound in conscience to think that some medieval pope was divinely inspired if he takes up arms and goes to war with an Italian city-state? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And in fact, when the popes were at war with Italian city-states, the guys on the other side were Catholic too, right? I mean, everyone understood this.
Yeah.
And you're not obligated to think that that's somehow guaranteed by divine authority. Even when it's not a civil matter, even when it's an ecclesiastical matter, Catholics understand that popes can make wise choices about church policy, and they can make terrible choices about church policy, right? And so personally, I'm not going to try to handicap the papacy and go, well, this ideology is good and that one is bad. Left wing is good, right wing is bad, right wing is good, left wing is bad. All ideology is bad, right? And to the extent that we allow ideological thinking to infect our living out the life of the gospel, to that extent we've sort of compromised the truth of the faith. I'm not interested in right-wing popes. I'm not interested in left-wing popes. Or bishops or priests, but I'm sure we're going to get them till the end of time, because we always have. Think to St. Peter, who was the very first pope. Did he have a political ideology, a social ideology that ran contrary to the gospel? Of course he did. What was it? Well, when guys from Jerusalem show up from James and start making noise about eating with Gentiles, the policy says, hold back from the Gentiles, from table fellowship with Gentiles, so as not to offend the party from Jerusalem. That was a policy decision motivated by a kind of social ideology. It was the wrong judgment. It was the wrong idea, right? So it's possible to be a pope or a bishop and to do that. So we understand that. When any pope makes a good decision, we're happy about it. If he makes a bad decision that hurts something in the life of the faithful, the church or civil society, obviously we grieve that. But the charism of infallibility, the manner in which the Holy Spirit guides the Pope to teach the truth, only comes into play when he is defining dogmatic truths. And that is so very rare. So you have to distinguish that charism of infallibility, which is a very rare charism, from the man and from the office. The office is a divine institution. God established the office of the papacy for the church in the same way that he established the institution of marriage or the civil authority. I mean, St. Paul says all authority is from heaven. The king, the emperor, the president, the governor, these things are by divine institution, by divine providence. Doesn't mean that the individual office holders, whether they be king, pope, bishop, governor, legislator or whatever, necessarily executes that office in a worthy manner. So we just always pray for holy and wise popes and holy and wise kings and holy and wise presidents and pray that they have prudence and execute their office in a wise and timely manner. No guarantee that they will.
Colin, thanks so much for your call. Sorry we couldn't get to your other question, but we've got full boards here. Let's get to Greg in Minnesota. Greg is listening on YouTube. Greg, what's on your mind today, sir?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm a revert. The thing that I've been having a struggle with my family, there's so many in my extended family and friendships, too. These are people who are divorced or in, disordered, if you want to call it, the relationships. One family member is even kind of swinging both ways and stuff. And, well, if it were me, and maybe it's my, if I were in a state of sin, whatever it is, I mean, I would still show up to pancake breakfast. I'd still show up to Bible study. I mean, I wouldn't try to promote my disordered life as, sort of good or anything. I'd keep quiet about it, but maybe me, I'm just very comfortable with showing up anyway, and it feels like and this is maybe a cultural question, if I invite relatives, come to church, so you're in a divorced and remarried state, and that's never going to change until the day you die. A part of me wants to say, so what? Show up to pancake breakfast, try to learn something, listen to the homily, and yeah, nothing's ever going to change and you can't receive the Eucharist, but just sort of accept that as kind of marginally okay, and we don't seem to have a Catholic culture that can do that for these people, where we can bring them into the church anyway.
Yeah, I really appreciate the comment, and I think that you are speaking with the mind of the Holy Father here, who has spoken a lot to this issue. When people are separated from the life of the church through irregular marriages and other situations, and maybe they're not in communion with the church, they're not receiving the sacraments, does that mean we should write them off? Does that mean we should ignore them and they should cease to be a matter of pastoral concern for the church? And Pope Francis has made very clear, no, that does not mean we should write them off. They should, in fact, be a high pastoral priority. Jesus would leave the 99 on the hillside and go after the one sheep. And you're correct that we don't always have a good culture within our parishes and dioceses of reaching out and welcoming people who are on the margins, and that would include these kinds of margins, the margins of irregular marriages and other forms of life that are maybe aberrant in one way or another. We don't have a good culture of dealing with that, and Pope Francis has said, doggone it, we need to fix that. We need to expend a great deal of pastoral energy trying to change the culture of our churches so that they are welcoming places of encounter for people from all walks of life, that they wouldn't be afraid to come and receive from the church. I couldn't agree more.
All right. And we thank you so much, Greg, for your question. And we could not get to Merlin checking in on YouTube. We're going to try to hold his question over to a future show. Same thing for Robert in Vero Beach, Florida. A great question there. Paul in Indianapolis, another great question. But we just flat ran out of time. So Dr. David Andrews will do it again sometime.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. And don't forget, we do this program on EWTN Radio 5 days a week, Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern. You can check out the podcast anytime you wish by going to EWTNradio.net, EWTNradio.net. And as we mentioned earlier, you can always send us an email. Just send that to ctc@EWTN.com. ctc@EWTN.com. Comes in very handy for folks who are watching us on TV because we're not live on TV. That usually airs about 10 days after our radio broadcast. On behalf of our fantastic team here, I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Andrews. Hey, thanks for joining us. See you on next time here on EWTN's Call to Communion. Have a great day and God bless.